I understood the sleeping giant inside me the moment Raina slammed the door in my face and told me I had 24 hours to pack my things and leave. The house where I had lived for 7 years, the house where I had raised her since she was 11 years old, the house where every corner held a memory of my late husband Thomas and the life we had built together. She stood there in the doorway with her arms crossed over her chest, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against her designer blouse, her eyes cold and calculating in a way that made my blood run ice. She had always been difficult, always been the kind of child who tested boundaries and pushed limits, but this was something else entirely. This was cruelty wrapped in entitlement. And I could see in her expression that she truly believed she had won some kind of victory over me. I remember the exact words she used, the way her voice dripped with satisfaction as she told me that this house was hers now, that her father had left it to her in his will, and that she no longer wanted me living here contaminating the space with my presence. She said contaminating like I was some kind of disease, like the 7 years I had spent caring for her and loving her and trying to be the mother figure she so desperately needed after losing her own mom meant absolutely nothing. I stood there on that porch with my heart hammering in my chest and my hands shaking at my sides, and for a moment I could not find the words to respond. Part of me wanted to scream at her, to tell her exactly what I thought of her selfishness and her cruelty, but another part of me just felt this overwhelming sadness wash over me like a wave. This was the girl I had tucked into bed when she had nightmares, the girl I had helped with homework and driven to dance classes and held when she cried about boys who broke her heart. This was the girl whose father had loved more than anything in the world, and now she was looking at me like I was nothing more than an obstacle to be removed. The rain started falling just as she closed the door, heavy drops that soaked through my sweater and plastered my hair to my face as I stood there trying to process what had just happened. I could hear her inside talking on the phone, her voice bright and cheerful as she told someone, probably one of her equally shallow friends, about how she had finally gotten rid of me. She laughed, and that sound cut through me deeper than any knife ever could. I walked to my car in a daze, my mind racing through everything that had led to this moment. Thomas had died 8 months ago, a sudden heart attack that took him from us without warning. And in those 8 months, Raina had transformed from a grieving daughter into something I barely recognized. She had always been spoiled. Thomas admitted that himself. But after his death, she became vindictive and mean in ways that shocked me. She started making comments about how I was not her real mother, how I had no right to tell her what to do, how she could not wait until she inherited everything and could finally live her life without my interference. I had tried to be patient with her, tried to understand that she was processing her grief in her own way, but there were limits to what anyone could endure. I had loved Thomas with everything I had, and losing him had broken something inside me that I was not sure would ever fully heal. We had met when I was 32 and he was 38, both of us coming out of difficult previous relationships and not looking for anything serious. But then we found each other at a mutual friend's barbecue, and something just clicked between us in a way I had never experienced before. He was kind and funny and genuinely good, the kind of man who remembered the little things and always made me feel valued and heard. We got married after 2 years of dating, and he told me from the beginning that Raina was part of the package. Her biological mother had passed away from cancer when Raina was 6, and Thomas had raised her alone for 5 years before meeting me. I knew taking on the role of stepmother would not be easy, but I genuinely wanted to try. I wanted to be someone Raina could count on, someone who would love her and support her the way Thomas did. Those first few years were rocky. I will not pretend they were not. Raina tested me constantly, pushing boundaries and seeing how far she could go before I would snap. She told me more than once that I was not her mother and never would be, that I was just some woman her dad married who did not really matter. Those words hurt more than I let on, but I kept trying. I showed up to every school event, every dance recital, every parent-teacher conference. I learned her favorite foods and made them for dinner. I listened when she wanted to talk about her friends or her crushes or her dreams for the future. Slowly, very slowly, she started to soften toward me. By the time she was 15, she had started calling me by my first name, Meredith, instead of just avoiding calling me anything at all. She let me help her pick out dresses for school dances. She came to me when she had her first real heartbreak and cried in my arms while I stroked her hair and told her everything would be okay. I thought we had finally found our rhythm, that we had built something real and lasting. Thomas thought so too. He told me all the time how grateful he was that Raina had me in her life, how much it meant to him that we had formed a bond. He said I had given him the family he always dreamed of, and that made every difficult moment worth it. We talked about the future, about retiring early and traveling the world together, about all the things we would do once Raina was grown and off living her own life. We never imagined that he would be gone before any of that could happen. I drove around aimlessly that night after Raina kicked me out, not knowing where to go or what to do. I ended up at a coffee shop downtown, sitting in a corner booth with a cup of tea I did not drink, just staring out the window at the people passing by and trying to make sense of my life. My phone kept buzzing with messages, probably Raina, making sure I understood that she was serious about wanting me gone, but I could not bring myself to look at them. I felt numb, like I was watching everything happen to someone else from a great distance. The rational part of my brain knew I needed to find a lawyer, needed to figure out what my rights were and what I could do about this situation. But the emotional part of me just wanted to curl up somewhere and disappear. How had things gone so wrong so quickly? How had the girl I loved like my own daughter turned into someone capable of such cruelty? I sat in that coffee shop until they announced they were closing, and then I drove to a hotel on the edge of town and checked in for the night. The room was small and sterile, with bland beige walls and an uncomfortable bed that creaked every time I moved. I lay there staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep, my mind replaying every moment of the day over and over again. I thought about Thomas and how disappointed he would be if he could see what Raina had become. He had always seen the best in her, always made excuses for her behavior, and insisted that she just needed time and patience. I wondered if he would have believed me if I told him what she had done, or if he would have found some way to justify it. The next morning I woke up with a pounding headache and a sense of grim determination settling over me. I was not going to let Raina steamroll over me without a fight. I might have been grieving and heartbroken, but I was not weak, and I was not going to let a 20-year-old who had never faced a real consequence in her life push me around. I made an appointment with a lawyer, a woman named Patricia Chen, who specialized in estate law and came highly recommended. I drove to her office with a folder full of documents, everything I could think of that might be relevant: marriage certificate, Thomas's will, bank statements, property records, anything that might help me understand what my legal standing actually was. Patricia was in her 50s with short silver hair and sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. She listened to my story without interrupting, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. And when I finished, she leaned back in her chair and studied me for a long moment. Then she asked me a question that changed everything. She asked me if I knew who actually owned the house. I told her what Raina had said, that Thomas had left it to her in his will, but Patricia shook her head slowly. She told me that was not how property ownership worked, that just because someone left a property to someone else in a will did not mean that person automatically owned it, especially if there were other factors at play. She asked me if my name was on the deed, and I felt my heart start to race as I told her I did not know. Thomas had bought the house before we got married, but after we wed, he had talked about adding my name to the deed. I could not remember if he had actually done it or not. We had been so busy with life, with work and raising Raina and just existing together, that the legal details had not seemed important. Patricia pulled up the county property records on her computer, typed in the address, and then turned the screen toward me. There it was, clear as day. The house was in my name and Thomas's name, as joint tenants with right of survivorship. That meant that when Thomas died, his half of the property automatically transferred to me. I owned the house outright. Raina had no claim to it whatsoever. I felt like I could not breathe as I stared at that screen. All this time, While Raina had been threatening me and treating me like I had no rights, I had been the actual owner of the property. The house was mine, not hers, mine. Patricia explained that Thomas's will likely included the house because it was written before he married me, and he probably never updated it after we got married and he added me to the deed. It was a common oversight, she said, one that happened more often than people realized. The will was essentially meaningless when it came to the house because the property transfer had already happened automatically upon Thomas's death due to how the deed was structured. I asked her what this meant, what I could do with this information, and she smiled in a way that made me think she dealt with situations like this more often than I would have guessed. She told me that I had every legal right to the property, and that Raina was actually the one trespassing if she refused to leave when I asked her to. I could issue an eviction notice, she said, though given the circumstances she recommended a different approach. She suggested I have a conversation with Raina first, explain the situation clearly, and give her the opportunity to apologize and make amends before taking any legal action. But if Raina refused to listen or continued her hostile behavior, Patricia said she would be happy to draw up the necessary paperwork to formally evict her. I left that office feeling like I had been given a weapon I never knew I had. For the first time since Thomas died, I felt like I had some control over my life again. I was not powerless. I was not the victim in this story. I was the homeowner, and Raina was about to learn a very hard lesson about assumptions and entitlement. I decided to wait a few days before confronting Raina. I wanted to have a clear plan, wanted to know exactly what I was going to say, and how I was going to handle whatever response she gave me. I stayed at the hotel and used that time to really think about what I wanted the outcome to be. Part of me, the part that still remembered tucking her in at night and helping her with her science projects, wanted to find a way to reconcile with her. I wanted her to understand what she had done wrong and genuinely apologize. And then maybe we could start to rebuild some kind of relationship. But another part of me, the part that was tired and hurt and angry, wanted to teach her a lesson she would never forget. I wanted her to feel the same shock and helplessness that I had felt standing on that porch in the rain. I wanted her to understand that actions have consequences and that you cannot treat people like garbage without eventually paying a price. In the end, I decided I would try the gentle approach first. I would go to the house, explain the situation calmly and rationally, and give her a chance to make things right. If she responded with humility and genuine remorse, I would consider letting her stay while we figured out a long-term arrangement. But if she doubled down on her cruelty, if she refused to acknowledge what she had done wrong, then I would have no choice but to take more drastic measures. I showed up at the house 3 days after Raina had kicked me out. I used my key to let myself in, something I had every right to do since I owned the property, and found Raina in the living room with 2 of her friends. They were sprawled across the furniture with wine glasses in their hands, laughing about something on one of their phones. The place was a mess. There were empty pizza boxes on the coffee table, dirty dishes piled in the sink visible from where I stood, and what looked like red wine spilled on the cream-colored carpet that Thomas and I had picked out together. Raina looked up when she heard me come in, and her expression shifted from surprise to anger in an instant. She stood up and demanded to know what I was doing there, told me I was trespassing, and she was going to call the police if I did not leave immediately. Her friends watched with wide eyes, clearly uncomfortable but too curious to excuse themselves. I stayed calm. I told Raina we needed to talk privately, that there had been a misunderstanding about the house and we needed to clear it up. She laughed, this harsh, ugly sound that did not match the girl I used to know. She told me there was no misunderstanding, that her father left her everything and I needed to accept that and move on with my life. She said I had been living off her father's money for years and it was time I stood on my own 2 feet. Her friends giggled at that, and I felt my resolve harden. I reached into my purse and pulled out the folder of documents Patricia had given me. I walked over to where Raina was standing and handed her the deed to the house. I told her to read it carefully, to note whose names were on that document. She snatched it from my hand and scanned it quickly, her expression going from smug to confused, to something that might have been fear. She looked up at me and said this had to be fake, that there was no way I owned the house, that her father would never have put my name on the deed without telling her. I told her she was welcome to verify it with the county records office if she did not believe me, that this was a certified copy and completely legitimate. I explained, as calmly as I could, how joint tenancy with right of survivorship worked, how Thomas's half of the property had automatically become mine when he died, and how that meant I was the sole owner of the house now. I told her that her father's will did not change that fact, and that she had been operating under a false assumption this entire time. The silence that followed was deafening. Raina's friends looked at each other uncomfortably, and one of them mumbled something about needing to leave and practically ran for the door. The other one followed quickly behind. Raina just stood there staring at the document in her hands, her face going through a series of expressions I could not quite read. Finally she looked up at me and asked what this meant. Her voice was smaller now, less certain. I told her it meant that she did not have the right to kick me out of my own house, and that in fact I could kick her out if I wanted to. I said I was willing to have a calm, adult conversation about what had happened and what we could do moving forward. But that required her to acknowledge that she had been wrong and to apologize for how she had treated me. She opened her mouth to say something, closed it again, and then I saw something shift in her eyes. The fear was replaced by anger, and she threw the document back at me. She told me I was lying, that I had forged the document somehow, or tricked her father into signing something he did not understand. She said there was no way he would have given me the house, that he loved her more than me and would have made sure she was taken care of first. She called me names I will not repeat, accused me of being a gold digger who had manipulated her father for years, and told me she was going to fight this in court and prove that I had no right to the house. I felt something inside me snap. I had tried to do this the right way, tried to give her a chance to make things right, and she had thrown it back in my face. I told her very calmly that she had two choices. She could apologize and we could discuss a reasonable arrangement for her to stay in the house while she figured out her next steps. Or she could continue with this behavior, and I would formally evict her. I gave her 24 hours to decide, the same amount of time she had given me. Then I turned and walked out, leaving her standing there in the living room, surrounded by the mess she and her friends had made. I did not hear from Raina that night or the next morning. When the 24-hour deadline passed without any contact, I called Patricia and told her to draw up the eviction papers. She said she would have them ready by the end of the day. I picked them up that afternoon and drove back to the house. This time when I walked in, Raina was alone. She was sitting on the couch with her phone in her hand, and when she saw me, she stood up quickly. She tried one more time to reason with me, though her version of reasoning was really just more accusations and threats. She said I had stolen her inheritance, that I was a terrible person for doing this to her when she was grieving her father, that everyone would know what kind of monster I was when she told them what I had done. I handed her the eviction notice. I told her she had 30 days to vacate the property, as required by state law, and that if she refused, I would pursue legal action to have her forcibly removed. I also told her that if she damaged the property in any way during those 30 days, I would hold her financially responsible and pursue civil damages. She looked at the papers in her hand like they were written in a foreign language. Then she started crying, these big theatrical sobs that might have moved me if I had not seen her use the same tactic on her father 100 times before. She told me she had nowhere to go, that all her friends were just casual acquaintances and she had no other family to turn to. She said I was supposed to be her family, that I had promised to take care of her when I married her father, and now I was abandoning her when she needed me most. I felt a flicker of something, maybe guilt, or maybe just sadness for what might have been, but I pushed it down. I told her she should have thought about that before she decided to kick me out of my own house. I reminded her that she was 20 years old, legally an adult, and it was time she started acting like one. Then I left again, and this time I did not look back. The next 30 days were a special kind of torture. Raina did not move out quietly. She made sure I knew she was angry by leaving the house in increasingly worse condition every time I stopped by to check on things. She let dishes pile up until they attracted insects. She stopped taking out the trash. She had people over at all hours making noise and leaving messes everywhere. It was like she was trying to destroy the place out of spite, to make me regret ever challenging her. I documented everything with photos and videos, building a case in case I needed to pursue damages later. Patricia advised me to stay patient, to let the eviction process play out properly rather than trying to force Raina out early and potentially giving her grounds to claim I had violated her rights. It was hard, watching my home be treated like a garbage dump, but I held firm. I had come this far, and I was not about to let Raina manipulate me into backing down now. She tried a few more times to change my mind. She showed up at my hotel room door one night crying and begging, saying she was sorry and she had made a mistake. But when I asked her specifically what she was sorry for, she could not or would not articulate it. She just kept saying she was sorry I was upset, that she wished things had gone differently. But she never actually acknowledged that what she had done was wrong. It was a non-apology, the kind of thing people say when they want the consequences to stop, but have no intention of actually changing their behavior. I told her the eviction would proceed as planned. As the 30-day mark approached, I started making arrangements to move back into my house. I hired a cleaning service to come in the day after Raina was supposed to be out, scheduled repairs for the damaged carpet and anything else that needed fixing, and began mentally preparing myself for what it would feel like to live in that house without Thomas and without Raina. It would be strange and sad and lonely, I knew that, but it would also be mine, my space, my rules, my peace. The night before the eviction deadline, Raina finally moved out. She did not tell me she was leaving, did not say goodbye or leave a note or anything. I only knew because I drove by the house and saw a moving truck in the driveway. I watched from down the street as she and some people I did not recognize loaded boxes and furniture into the truck. She looked small and tired, not at all like the confident girl who had slammed the door in my face a month earlier. I felt a complicated mix of emotions watching her go. Relief, certainly, but also sadness and a sense of loss that I had not fully expected. This was the end of something, the final severing of whatever relationship we might have salvaged. Once she drove away, there would be no going back. Part of me wanted to go to her, to offer one last olive branch, to see if maybe we could find some way to heal the damage that had been done. But I stayed in my car and watched until the truck pulled away, and then I drove back to my hotel for one final night. The next morning I walked into my house as the sole occupant for the first time. The place was a disaster, even worse than I had expected. Raina had taken some of the furniture that I was pretty sure belonged to me, not her, and what she had left behind was damaged or stained beyond repair. There was garbage everywhere, holes punched in a couple of walls, and the bathroom looked like it had not been cleaned in weeks. I stood in the middle of the living room and felt tears start to stream down my face. This was my home, the place where I had been happy with Thomas, and it had been turned into something I barely recognized. The cleaning service I had hired took one look at the place and told me it would take multiple days and cost significantly more than the original quote. I told them to do whatever was necessary. I could not live in this filth, could not start to rebuild my life in a space that felt this violated. While they worked, I went through the house room by room, cataloging the damage and making lists of what needed to be replaced or repaired. The cost was going to be substantial, thousands of dollars at least, and I knew I would have to pursue Raina for reimbursement. Patricia filed a civil suit on my behalf, claiming damages for the destruction of property and theft of items that belonged to me. Raina did not respond to the initial filing, and after several attempts to serve her at various addresses, we had to publish notice in the newspaper. It was another level of sadness, this formal legal process to try to hold her accountable for what she had done. It took 3 months to get the house back to a livable condition. Between the cleaning, the repairs, the replacement of damaged items, and the legal fees. I ended up spending close to $15,000. The civil suit against Raina was still pending, but Patricia warned me not to expect much. She said even if we won a judgment, actually collecting the money would be difficult if Raina did not have assets or income. I told her to pursue it anyway, not because I expected to get the money back, but because I wanted there to be a record of what she had done. I wanted there to be consequences, even if they were just on paper. During those 3 months, I did not hear from Raina at all. She did not call or text, or try to reach out in any way. It was like she had completely erased me from her life, the same way she had tried to erase me from the house. I told myself I was fine with that I did not need her in my life if she was going to continue to be toxic and cruel. But late at night, lying in bed in the house that felt too big and too empty, I missed her. I missed the girl she used to be, the one who let me braid her hair, and who laughed at my terrible jokes, and who sometimes, in unguarded moments, looked at me like maybe I was not so bad after all. I grieved for that relationship the same way I grieved for Thomas, mourning the loss of something that had once been precious, and was now gone forever. Life slowly started to find a new normal. I threw myself into work, taking on extra projects and staying late at the office because going home to an empty house was still hard. I reconnected with friends I had neglected during the worst of the conflict with Raina, accepting invitations to dinner and movie nights, and slowly rebuilding a social life that did not revolve around being a wife and stepmother. I started seeing a therapist, someone who specialized in grief and complicated family dynamics, and those weekly sessions became a lifeline. She helped me process everything that had happened, helped me understand that I was not a bad person for enforcing boundaries and that I had the right to protect myself even if it meant causing pain to someone I loved. She also helped me see that my relationship with Raina had always been complicated, that there had been warning signs and red flags that I had overlooked or minimized because I wanted so badly for things to work out. Thomas had enabled Raina's worst tendencies, she said, and I had unwittingly done the same by always giving her chance after chance, even when she showed me, through her actions, that she was not interested in changing. It was a hard truth to accept, but it also freed me from some of the guilt I had been carrying. I had done my best with an impossible situation, and the outcome was not entirely my fault. About 6 months after Raina moved out, I got a message from her on social media. It was short and seemed carefully worded, like she had written and rewritten it multiple times before sending. She said she wanted to talk, that she had been doing a lot of thinking and wanted to apologize for how she had treated me. She asked if we could meet for coffee, just the two of us, somewhere neutral where we could have an honest conversation. I stared at that message for a long time, my finger hovering over the keyboard as I tried to decide how to respond. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to protect myself from potentially being hurt again. But another part of me, the part that still remembered loving her and wanting the best for her, wondered if maybe this was genuine. Maybe she had grown up a little in the past 6 months. Maybe she had learned something from everything that had happened. I talked it over with my therapist, and she encouraged me to at least hear Raina out while maintaining clear boundaries. So I agreed to meet, choosing a coffee shop downtown that was public and familiar, somewhere I would feel safe. We met on a Sunday afternoon. I got there early and claimed a table in the corner where I could see the door, ordered a tea I did not really want, and tried to calm my racing heart. When Raina walked in, I barely recognized her. She looked older, more worn down, like the past 6 months had aged her several years. She was wearing jeans and a simple sweater, no makeup, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. She looked nervous as she approached the table, and when she sat down she could not quite meet my eyes. We sat in awkward silence for a moment, and then Raina started talking. She told me she had been staying with friends at first, bouncing from couch to couch, until she wore out her welcome and had to find a cheap apartment on the other side of town. She was working 2 jobs, she said, barely making ends meet, struggling in ways she had never struggled before. She said it had been a wake-up call. realizing that she did not actually know how to take care of herself, that she had always relied on her father or me to handle the difficult parts of life. She apologized for kicking me out of the house, said it was the worst thing she had ever done, and she had been living with the shame of it every day since. She said she understood now that I had been trying to help her, that I had loved her even when she made it impossible, and that she had thrown that away because she was angry and hurting and did not know how to process her grief over losing her father. She said she did not expect me to forgive her, but she wanted me to know that she was truly sorry and that she was trying to be a better person. I listened to all of this without interrupting, trying to gauge how genuine it was. She seemed sincere, but I had been fooled by her before. I told her I appreciated the apology, that it meant something to hear her take accountability for what she had done. But I also told her that trust was not something that could be rebuilt with words alone. That if she truly wanted to make amends, she would have to show me through her actions over time. She nodded and said she understood, that she did not expect things to go back to the way they were overnight. We talked for about an hour, mostly surface-level stuff about her jobs and her apartment and how she was managing. It was stilted and uncomfortable, but it was also the most honest conversation we had had in years. When we left the coffee shop, she asked if we could do this again sometime, and I said maybe. I told her I needed time to think about what I was comfortable with, but I did not completely close the door. Over the next few months, Raina and I met up a few more times. Coffee, mostly, sometimes a quick lunch. She was consistent, showing up on time and following through on what she said she would do. She did not ask me for money or favors, did not try to manipulate me into letting her move back into the house. She just talked about her life and her struggles and what she was learning about herself. Slowly, very slowly, I started to believe that maybe she was genuinely trying to change. We talked about her father sometimes, about how much we both missed him and how his absence had left this giant hole in both of our lives. She told me that one of the hardest parts of the past year had been realizing that she had pushed away the one person who could have helped her navigate her grief, the one person who had loved her father as much as she did. I told her I missed her too, missed the relationship we used to have, but that I needed her to understand that things would never be exactly the same as they were before. Too much had happened, too much damage had been done. She said she understood, and I think she actually did. The civil suit against her was eventually settled out of court. She agreed to a payment plan to reimburse me for the damages, small monthly payments that she could actually afford on her current income. It would take her years to pay it all back, but the fact that she was willing to try meant something. Patricia drew up the agreement, and we both signed it, and I felt like maybe this was the start of something. Not a return to the way things were, but something new that we were building together from the ground. It has been almost 2 years now since Raina kicked me out of my house. We are not back to being a family in the traditional sense, and I am not sure we ever will be. But we are something, some kind of relationship that is still being defined. She comes over for dinner occasionally, and we talk on the phone every few weeks. She has started going to therapy herself, working through her grief and her issues with control and entitlement. She has apologized more times than I can count, and each apology seems a little more genuine than the last. I have forgiven her, mostly, though I will admit there are still moments when I remember standing on that porch in the rain and the anger flares up fresh and hot. But I am working on it, trying to let go of the hurt and focus on who she is becoming rather than who she was. The house is fully mine now in every sense. I have redecorated, changed some of the furniture, made it feel less like the place I shared with Thomas, and more like my own space. It was painful at first, like I was erasing him, but my therapist helped me see that I was not erasing anything. I was just making room for the next chapter of my life. Thomas will always be part of this house, part of my story, but I cannot live in the past forever. I have to move forward, and that means creating a space that feels like it belongs to the person I am now, not the person I was when he was alive. Raina and I talk about her father sometimes, sharing memories and stories, and I think that has helped both of us. She has started to see him more clearly, not just as the perfect dad she idolized, but as a real person with flaws and weaknesses. She recognizes now that he spoiled her, that he shielded her from consequences in ways that ultimately hurt her, and she recognizes that I tried to balance that out, tried to give her structure and boundaries even when it made me the bad guy. She has thanked me for that more than once, said she wishes she had appreciated it at the time. I tell her we cannot change the past, we can only learn from it and try to do better moving forward. Some days are better than others. There are still moments of tension, still times when old patterns try to reassert themselves and we have to consciously choose to respond differently. But we are trying, both of us, and I think that counts for something. I have learned a lot about myself through this whole experience. I have learned that I am stronger than I thought I was, that I can stand up for myself even when it is hard and painful. I have learned that love is not the same thing as being a doormat, that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to enforce consequences and let them learn from their mistakes. I have learned that grief makes people do terrible things, but that does not mean those things should be excused or enabled. And I have learned that forgiveness is a process, not a destination. Something you have to choose over and over again even when part of you wants to hold on to the anger. Looking back on the moment when Raina slammed the door in my face and told me to leave, I can see now that it was a turning point for both of us. It was the moment when the dynamic between us shifted, when I stopped trying to be the peacekeeper and started standing up for myself. It was the moment when she learned that actions have consequences, that you cannot treat people badly and expect them to keep accepting it forever. It was painful and ugly, and I would not wish that experience on anyone, but I also would not change it. Because it led to growth for both of us, forced us both to examine ourselves and our behavior and decide who we wanted to be. If someone had told me that day in the rain that this would eventually lead to a healthier relationship with Raina, I would not have believed them. But here we are, 2 years later, and we are figuring it out. It is messy and imperfect, and sometimes frustrating, but it is real. And maybe that is enough. The house that was once a source of conflict between us is now just a house again. I live here, and Raina visits, and we are both okay with that arrangement. She has her own life, her own apartment, her own independence, and I have my space, and my peace and my autonomy. We do not need to live together to be in each other's lives. We do not need to go back to the way things were to have a meaningful relationship. We are both learning to accept each other as we are, not as we wish the other would be. That is something Thomas never quite managed with Raina. He loved her so much that he could not see her clearly, could not acknowledge her flaws or hold her accountable, and in trying to protect her from every hardship, he ultimately did her a disservice. She never learned resilience or self-sufficiency, or how to handle disappointment. When he died, she was left completely unprepared for the realities of adult life. I think some part of her knew that, and resented both him and me for it. She resented him for leaving her, and she resented me for being the one who survived, the one who was supposed to pick up the pieces. That resentment manifested as cruelty, but underneath it was just fear and grief and the desperate flailing of someone who did not know how to cope. I do not think Raina fully understood what she was doing when she kicked me out. I do not think she grasped the magnitude of what she was attempting, or how much it would hurt both of us. She was acting on impulse and anger, trying to exert control over something in a life that felt completely out of control. She wanted to hurt me the way she was hurting, wanted to push me away before I could leave her the way her father had left her. It was not rational or fair, but grief rarely is. The moment she found out that I owned the house, that she had no power over me in the way she thought she did, something shifted in her. She had to confront the reality that her assumptions were wrong, that she had been operating from a place of ignorance and arrogance. That moment of realization, when I handed her the deed and she saw the truth in black and white, was probably the first time in her life that she had faced real consequences for her actions. Her father would have found a way to fix it, to smooth things over, to make sure she never had to feel uncomfortable or ashamed. But I was not her father, and I was not going to rescue her from the mess she had created. She had to sit with that discomfort, had to face what she had done, and ultimately that was the beginning of her growth. If I am being honest, there is a part of me that took satisfaction in turning the tables on her. When I realized I owned the house, that I could evict her just as easily as she had tried to evict me, I felt a surge of power that was intoxicating. For so long I had felt powerless in that relationship, always trying to keep the peace, always being the bigger person, always swallowing my hurt and frustration because I did not want to cause problems. And suddenly I had the upper hand, and it felt good. Maybe too good. I could have handled the situation with more grace, could have been gentler in how I delivered the news, but I was angry and hurt and tired of being treated like I did not matter, and so I let her feel some of that pain. I do not regret it, exactly, but I do wonder sometimes if there was a better way. My therapist says I should not second-guess myself, that I set a boundary and enforced it, and that was healthy. But it is hard not to think about how things might have gone differently if I had approached it another way. Then again, I tried the gentle approach first. I tried to have a calm conversation, tried to give her a chance to apologize and make things right. She threw it back in my face, so maybe the harder approach was the only thing that would have gotten through to her. Maybe she needed to experience the full weight of consequences before she could begin to understand what she had done wrong. The legal battle that followed, the eviction and the civil suit, was exhausting and expensive and emotionally draining. There were many days when I questioned whether it was worth it, whether I should just let it go and move on with my life. But I kept thinking about what kind of message that would send, both to Raina and to myself. If I backed down, if I let her get away with treating me that way, what would that teach her? That she could act horribly and face no real consequences. That she could hurt people and they would just take it. And what would it teach me? That I did not deserve to stand up for myself. That my peace and my home and my dignity were less important than avoiding conflict. I could not accept those messages. So, I pushed forward with the legal process, even when it was hard, even when I wanted to give up, and I think that was the right choice. It showed Raina that I was serious, that I would not be pushed around or dismissed, and it showed me that I was capable of fighting for myself, that I had a backbone I had not fully realized was there. The damage Raina did to the house before she moved out was vindictive and childish, but it was also revealing. It showed me just how much anger she was carrying, how deep her pain went. She was not just lashing out at me, she was lashing out at the situation, at her father for dying, at the universe for taking him away. The house represented everything she had lost, and destroying it was her way of expressing the rage she could not put into words. I do not excuse what she did, and I certainly made her pay for the damages, but I do understand it better now. She was not a malicious person, she was a broken person acting out in the only way she knew how. That does not make it okay, but it does make it more complicated than simple villainy. People are rarely purely good or purely bad, and Raina was no exception. She was capable of great cruelty, but she was also capable of love, and vulnerability and growth. The question was whether she would choose to pursue the latter or continue down the path of the former. It took her hitting rock bottom, struggling to survive on her own, before she was willing to choose growth. And even then it was not a straight line. There were setbacks and moments of regression. Times when old patterns tried to reassert themselves. But she kept trying, and that is what mattered. Our relationship now is nothing like what it was when Thomas was alive. Back then, I was always trying to win her approval, always walking on eggshells to avoid upsetting her, always putting her needs ahead of my own. I told myself that was what a good stepmother did, that I needed to sacrifice my own comfort for the sake of family harmony. But it was not healthy for either of us. It taught her that she could treat me poorly without consequence, and it taught me to minimize my own feelings and needs. Now we relate to each other more as adults, as two people who have history and baggage, but are trying to build something new together. I do not cater to her moods, or try to manage her emotions. I speak my truth, even when it is uncomfortable, and I expect her to do the same. We disagree sometimes, And when we do, we talk it through rather than sweeping it under the rug. It is not always comfortable, but it is real. And I think real is better than the false harmony we used to have. She has told me that she appreciates this version of our relationship more, that it feels more genuine than the dynamic we had before. She says she always knew I was holding back, that I was not being fully honest with her about how I felt, and that made it hard for her to trust me. She thought I was being fake, performing the role of stepmother rather than actually caring about her. Now she knows that when I say something, I mean it. When I tell her I love her, she can believe it. And when I tell her she has hurt me or crossed a line, she knows I am being honest rather than just trying to manipulate her. That honesty has created a foundation that we can actually build on. There are moments when I miss the simpler times. When Raina was younger and our conflicts were smaller, and Thomas was there to mediate and make everything feel manageable. But I also recognize that those times were not as simple as they seemed in retrospect. There were always undercurrents of tension, always unresolved issues that we papered over rather than addressing. Thomas's death forced everything to the surface, brought all those hidden problems into the light, where they could no longer be ignored. In a strange way, as painful as it was, I think it was necessary. We had to break before we could rebuild something stronger. I have come to see the entire experience, from Raina kicking me out to the legal battles, to our slow reconciliation, as a kind of crucible. It burned away everything that was false and weak in our relationship, leaving only what was genuine and strong enough to survive the fire. We are both different people than we were 2 years ago. Raina is more independent and self-aware, more willing to admit when she is wrong, and more capable of genuine empathy. I am more confident and assertive, more willing to stand up for myself, and less afraid of conflict. We have both learned hard lessons, paid steep prices for our mistakes, and come out the other side changed. I still own the house, and I still live here alone. Raina has her own place, and that is how it should be. She is an adult now, not a child who needs to be taken care of, and our relationship reflects that new reality. She does not depend on me for housing or financial support, and I do not depend on her for companionship or validation. We choose to be in each other's lives because we want to be, not because we have to be. That choice makes all the difference. Every conversation, every shared meal, every moment of connection is something we are choosing actively rather than simply defaulting to because of legal or familial obligation. And that makes it more meaningful, more precious. I think Thomas would be proud of where we have ended up. Despite the rocky journey to get here, he always wanted us to have a good relationship, and in the end, we do. It just looks different than he imagined it would. It is messier and more complicated, built on a foundation of conflict and resolution rather than simple affection. But it is real, and it is ours, and that is enough. When I think back to that moment on the porch when Raina told me to leave, when the rain was falling and my heart was breaking, I remember thinking that this was the end of everything. The end of my marriage, the end of my family, the end of the life I had built with Thomas, and in some ways, it was that version of my life, that version of myself, died that day. But something new was born too. A stronger version of myself who knew how to stand up and fight back, who understood her worth and refused to accept less than she deserved. A new relationship with Raina built on honesty and mutual respect rather than obligation and fear. A new chapter of life that was fully my own, not defined by my role as wife or stepmother, but by who I was as an individual. The house is a symbol of all that. It is mine, fully and completely, and no one can take it from me. But more than that, it is a reminder of everything I survived, everything I overcame, everything I learned about myself through this process. When I walk through these rooms, I see the life Thomas and I shared, but I also see the life I am building for myself now. Both can be true at once. I can honor the past while also embracing the future. So yes, she kicked me out of my own house, and yes, I became her landlord. But that is not really the story, not the important part anyway. The important part is what happened after, the hard work of rebuilding and reconciliation and learning to see each other clearly. The important part is that we both survived, both changed, both became better versions of ourselves through the struggle. The house was just the catalyst, the thing that forced us to confront truths we had been avoiding for years. In the end, it was never really about the house at all. It was about power and control and grief, and the complicated ways that people hurt each other when they are in pain. And it was about learning that sometimes you have to be willing to lose everything before you can find what really matters. If you are watching this from somewhere in the world, I would love to know where. Drop a comment and let me know what country or city you are joining from. And if this story resonated with you in any way, please give it a like, and consider subscribing to hear more stories like this one. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being here with me through the hard parts and the hopeful parts. And remember, no matter what you are facing, you are stronger than you think you are. Sometimes you just have to be pushed to the edge before you discover that strength. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you in the next story.